Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about leveling up. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, my question is how can I progress from mid to senior mid or beyond despite being the most senior already in my small firm? The main thing we lack is professional practices like Agile, CI/CD, DevOps, QA, etc. Well, so this is one of those situations where you're describing something that not everybody understands, I think. Mm, it's not exclusive in any way, I would argue, to software development. And it is the phenomenon that you can label yourself as something and call yourself, in this case, a senior level software developer. In one scenario, you're going to be right, but in another scenario you're not going to be right. And the thing is, the way that this happens is usually because you forget that the world is bigger than your company. And so this, I argue, is one of those reasons why a lot of people refer to traveling as being a healthy thing for your perspective, because basically if you visit a lot of countries and you see various cultures and living conditions and things like that, you get a broader perspective on things and you can have something to, well, you have things to compare with when you then look back at your own hometown or so forth. A classic one is you grow up in your hometown, and that's like your entire universe when you're growing up, and then you go to the big city and you realize that, oh my lord, this little place that I used to think was so big is actually quite small in comparison to other things that are out there. But you would never know that unless you left and did something else. And the same thing is true here. The times I have had interviews with people who call themselves senior level software developers, and they have a skill set that is not even on par with what we would consider a junior level software developer is quite high, guys. A classic, like one of my classics, is that you have a front-end developer who comes in, has worked for 10, 15 years, and then you ask them, okay, so have you worked, how much, like, what type of JavaScript frameworks have you been using? And they say, no, we don't work with JavaScript in my company. We only do the CSS and the HTML. Okay, so who does the JavaScript? Well, the backend developer does that. Okay, then I'm sorry, because here you actually need to know these things. And you might think that I'm joking, but I'm not, guys. This is actually something that does happen, and it's one of the main reasons why I tell people that if you want to be a solid professional, it is important for you to understand that software development happens at different levels, just as driving happens at a different level. When I drive to the grocery store, yes, I am. You can call me a driver, but or I'm not a race car driver. If you then go and look at NASCAR or Formula One or something more, like they're doing the same thing that I'm doing in essence, but they're doing it at a much higher level. And unless you have the ability to determine what level the average, well, I'm just gonna say that smaller companies deal with usually smaller problems as opposed to the larger companies. You can have very complicated problems in a small firm as well, but the thing that you have to understand is, like, for example, CI/CD and DevOps and so forth. It's not a given that every single little firm out there is going to have a need for that. If what you're doing, as an example, is to make WordPress sites all day long for various small businesses, then perhaps this is not something you will ever come across. And so if you really want to know how to level up or how to get to the sort of levels that you want to be, where you want to be like a world-class software developer or like a true industry professional, you will have to do a little bit of traveling and keep an eye out for what is considered common practices across the entire industry, not just in one company. And that's the key thing. What happens in just one company may not necessarily be exactly the thing that is happening in all of them. And so, if you have this mindset, as I like to call it, I actually refer to it as professional traveling, that you do a little bit of professional traveling, then you will have a better understanding of, okay, what is actually expected from a quote-unquote senior or mid-level or so forth, in not just one context, but what is the range of things that can be expected in various companies. Another one, as I've mentioned a few times before, is I usually talk about front-end here because they are one of the few. Well, let's mix it up. Let's talk about back-end, where back-end developers don't really take the time to learn their own pipelines. They don't really know how to run things in a cloud provider, or they don't take the time to learn virtualization or Docker containerization and things like that, because in their mind all they should care about is the application server itself. Uh, yeah, sure, that might work if you're working in a small firm, but there's quite a lot of companies where you are expected to know that, and if you don't know that, you have a problem. And so that's the thing that I also pitch to the front-end developers who have this idea that, I should only focus on the UI. And I go, no, because your company is not going to accept that you say, no, actually, I don't know how to run the basic node server and run the build so that it can be shipped into either a container or some storage system somewhere where you're going to serve up the content. You don't get that luxury because the company is going to decide for you what they need, and if you don't have those skills, then you're not going to get hired, and then you might have to work at a smaller firm. And there's nothing wrong with working at a smaller firm, but as I said, that comes with the very real possibility that you will never actually get to a world class, or what the vast majority of the industry is going to consider mid-level, junior, senior, architect, or whatever. You're gonna have a job, but you're not gonna be in that sort of position where your market value is like where most of the jobs out there are going to, at least look at your CV, and they're going to do an interview with you, because you simply don't have what most people consider to be like the archetype of skills or so forth for the level that you claim that you are. So what I want you to take away from this is that the best way for you to level up is to switch roles. If you're working in a niched fashion or in a small company that doesn't actually use a lot of the practices that you heard about or that is mainstream, because that's the key thing. Just because someone is not using a specific practice doesn't necessarily mean that that is a bad place to work for your career, because some practices, guys, are just flavors of the month things. Things are like, a classic one is, someone asks me, Frederick, we're working on a monolith in my company, but I've heard that microservices and having like 100 microservices is the way to go, and I think I should switch jobs. And I go, that's not really true. Like, it's not like every single company out there runs everything on like 100 microservices or something like that. There are quite a lot of companies who are running a monolith. It's just an architecture of a system. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky to figure out, okay, so what am I lacking from my skill bag? And the problem is that in order for you to truly understand that, I argue at the very least, you sort of have to find a strategy for when it's time to move on. If you like a company and you really want to stay there, then do it. As I said, it's not really a requirement for you to learn all the quote-unquote things out of the industry. But if you want to be a little bit more like myself or people like me, then you will have to do that, because you will not be able to learn all the various ways that things can happen and the different practices and styles of doing things and so forth in one company. No one company is using everything in IT. And when you realize that by moving a few times, you will learn a range of things. So that may not necessarily be the thing that you have to have in order to get, work if you're moving on or so forth and so forth. It's just a way for you to make sure that you sort of know the range of things that of skills and tools that are being used, and you can do what you want with that. I use it as a part of my career strategy, but it's not something that is right for everybody. Some people are perfectly fine just working on a good, like a single stack or something like that for most of their career. You're still going to get paid to do it. It really comes down to what are your ambitions. Have a great day.